Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the January presentation of Coffee Talk. My name is Sean O'Brien. As always, I'm pleased to be joined by Steve Huntington. Steve, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Steve Huntington. I'm the Director of Analytics here at Quick Rate and Quick Analytics. Spent my entire career working with community financial institutions and in all manner of strategic planning, valuation, M&A, capital work, and model design. And I've been working with Sean here at Quick Rate for a little over a decade.
Thank you, Steve.
And Sean, by the way, it's not letting
yeah.
me start my video.
All right.
It says the host has stopped my video.
Huh.
You trying to give me a hint?
See here, huh? I don't see where
I've never seen that before.
I haven't either. Let me see here. I don't see that I have the ability to fix it.
You cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Let me make you the host and see if you can do it then.
Sure.
All right. So while Steve works on that, just a reminder, you can communicate with us through the chat feature or the Q&A box. And again, just kind of submit those questions as you'd like. We'll monitor them. And if we don't take them during the midst of the conversation, we'll take them certainly at the end of the presentation today. Just a reminder, we will send out a link to the recordings and a copy of the slides. So don't worry if you don't have it. Oh, good. Thank you. And again, just a reminder, again, I think you all made these coffee talks very enjoyable and very successful and gratifying for us. So, our attempt here is to continue to do those throughout the year. I think we're going to start today by just kind of talking about, what we saw last year, what we see, for this year. Again, try to continue to elevate your understanding not only of the guidance, but also the CECLSolver itself, and just make this practice of reserving for your portfolios, more matter of fact every chance we get. As we began to introduce last year, we will start with some polling questions. So we appreciate your participation in these. Let me make sure I can launch these. Yep. And we'll go ahead and get started. The first one's really about these ACL topics, right? Is there something that your regulators or auditors have asked most about, right? I think we're curious just to see if any of you are being asked for particular areas of around the tool and if or the guidance. And so again, we can perhaps tailor these discussions more to what you're being asked to respond to. So we'll give this 15 or 30 seconds and then we'll move on. Just a few questions again today. They're all pretty straightforward. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end this one. You can see the results here. Most of the, not surprisingly, around just methodology choice, Q factors are the most common topics, followed then by validation, which we'll certainly discuss some things in response to that today. All right, let's go back to the next question here. This one's just really around loan portfolio growth. Do you expect your loan portfolio to grow or shrink this year or remain flat? So again, we'll just give this 15 to 30 seconds. All right, certainly encouraging. We're going to go ahead and end this one. 62% of you expect it to grow, 30% flat, and 9%, obviously with rounding, think it will shrink. So certainly encouraging. Oops, I don't know if I shared those. Encouraging outlook. All right, let's move to the next one. Let me stop sharing that one. We'll go into deposit growth, or share growth. What do you expect for growth this year? Do you expect it to increase, decrease, or stay flat? Right, kind of on the heels of the loan expectation. Hopefully, we'll be able to grow our share balances in the same manner. Let's give this another 5 seconds or so. All right, so 56% say increase, 34% flat, and then 10% decrease. So let me share those again. Sorry, you can tell it's January, not firing on all cylinders here yet. Let me stop that one. Okay. The next one's just kind of your outlook for 2024. Are you optimistic about 2024 or pessimistic? So again, choice is optimistic, pessimistic, or neutral. Go ahead. And this one, pretty evenly split. 47% are optimistic, 20% pessimistic, and 33% neutral. So good. Glass half full. I like it.
Is that about the banking environment or the political
the environment.
environment?
Our outlook for the credit unions. Yes. All right, and then just
Not
again,
for the election.
Exactly. Local deposits or share. Hold on, let me see it and stop sharing. There we go. Just again, do you have a plan to grow your shares, in your markets this year? Just a simple yes or no. Again, kind of on the heels of expected loan growth. I know a challenge for a lot of institutions last year was just kind of meeting that loan demand. So, obviously local market activity increasingly important. And so, yeah, overwhelmingly great to see. I'm going to go ahead and end this one and share it. 85% of you have a plan for attacking those local markets this year. So good. Well, thank you so much for participating in those. Your thoughts are always welcomed and appreciated. And how we wanted to start today's coffee talk was really by just kind of recapping kind of what we heard and saw from many of you this year, right? I think first off, congratulations to everyone. I think as a group, we successfully transitioned to CECL or the ACL, as it's now more commonly referred to. So I think again, hats off to all of you. I think you as individually and as an industry and collectively as CECLSolver clients, really did a great job in making this transition pretty seamlessly. I think we saw clearly over the course of the year, an increase in understanding of not only both the tool, but just of your own individual processes and feeling much more comfortable and confident in them. I'd say the one area, where we still kind of have continued discussions are just around, in curiosity and just kind of reflection on every institution's Q factors. I think commonly, we'll get the question, am I doing this correctly? And again, I think everyone's doing a fine job. I think it's an area where we can continually improve it if we want to, but I think everyone's processes, for the most part, are satisfying what's being asked of you. I think another area where we get a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but we get, kind of consistent inquiries on is around the WARM tool, right? And the calculation of it, and particularly around the shorter WARM using the tool with amortization payments versus not. And so I think it's important to, again, kind of put context and time frame around this. When we first introduced the CECLSolver tool, and my position as a solution provider, I felt like we should be the most conservative or offer it with the most conservative approach, which almost by definition means a longer WARM period where we are evaluating and aggregating losses over a longer period of time. However, I also understand that, the whole reserve process is, as much art as it is science. And that for some of you, you don't want 1 penny more in that reserve than is necessary. And there are others of you who would like everything possible that you can get in there. So you have a set of extremes. As a tool provider, we said we're gonna start conservatively, but recognizing that not everybody wants that approach, we also recognize that in our initial tool, we did not account for normal amortization payments that would be occurring. Hence, we updated the tool. Now, some of you didn't notice it or may have found it later in the year, but then it started to spur questions. Am I using the right one? Which one should I use? There's no right or wrong answer. It's really what's reflective of your culture and your philosophy around your own reserve. If you want a more conservative warm, a longer warm, then there's this methodology. If you want a shorter one, there's an additional methodology. Both of them are perfectly acceptable, and Steve's going to touch on those here in a couple of slides. Another area where we got, questions because it was new was just, am I doing the unfunded commitments correctly, right? Am I handling this properly? What are other people doing? So we saw that. And then towards the tail end of the year, we started getting questions around, validation expectations, as people started to plan and auditors started to plan for year end. So again, a really successful year. I think very logical and natural questions. And I think just, again, we were really pleased with just how all of you took to the tool, how you took to the process, and then the continued discussion and reflection. Steve, anything you want to add here?
Nope.
Okay. Moving on to the next one, just kind of what are our expectations for this year, and what do we see, right? I think, our expectation is that you all, again, will continue to, feel better and, more confident in CECLSolver and your process. I think there'll be an ongoing kind of reflection around Q factors, particularly if you need to change it, right? And I think this is the question we probably receive most around Q factors is, if I change my Q factors, what do I need to do? I think most auditors and regulators are very comfortable with the process that you have in place. What they want to understand, though, is if you do change a Q factor, why you changed it, right? Not that they're going to challenge the change, but they do want to understand why you changed it and document and explain why you changed it. So, if we do encounter any stress this year, or if you encounter any stress this year within your portfolio, and you do want to make changes to your Q factors, just be mindful of the fact, make sure you spend some time explaining and documenting that change to your Q factor.
And to add to that, the Q factor process is going to be dynamic in each period that you're doing it, and it's keeping them. Qualitative factors are relative to your historical loss experience, right? They're adjustments up or down from the base being your historical loss experience. So as your loss experience changes as we go through a credit cycle, your qualitative factor adjustments should also be continually modified to reflect that. For example, if you have, right now, if you've had 0 losses in your mortgage portfolio over the last 5 years and over your whole WARM, let's say, so your historical loss rate, aggregate lifetime historical loss rate is 0, and you have 60 basis points in Q factor, so that you have an expected loss rate going forward of 60 basis points. Now, if you realize some losses, some significant losses, let's say you just had a 30 basis point charge off in that portfolio, and now when you're next quarter, you're recalculating your historical loss rate, it's now no longer 0, it's now 30 basis points. You should be taking a fresh look at that qualitative factor adjustment, not just blindly keeping it at 60 basis points because you're worried about changing it and having to defend it. If a lot of that 60 basis point Q factor has now been sort of, well, I knew I'd have some losses. Now some of them are in the historical context. You're going to want to consider modifying, bringing down that Q factor adjustment, because you've just recognized, you've shifted some of the burden from an expected future loss to what you've now realized as part of your historical losses. So I encourage everyone to take a fresh look at those Q factors and not be afraid to increase or decrease them, especially as your historical experience changes, or old losses roll off the back of your look back period, right? There's different ways that can work.
Yep. I think we'll see an increased understanding of the unfunded commitments. I know we're going to talk, we'll certainly talk about it throughout the year during the coffee talks. I think the big point here is that the majority of us aren't really capturing anything in the reserve, and that's fine. I do think it does make you, an easy target for a question from an auditor or regulator, which again, they're not going to tell you that it's wrong, but they're going to ask you to explain or defend why you might, have zero in there. So just be mindful of that. If you don't have anything in that, you'll likely get a question, asking for defense or support of why you've taken that position. And then I think naturally we'll probably see some, more additional inquiries around validation, particularly since this is technically the first year, right? So if you think about a 2023 implementation of the ACL, that becomes a 2023 audit issue, which now we'll experience and address in 2024. It is not uncommon for auditors in the implementation of a new tool to ask for validation. They may not ask, but they might. So we should be prepared. We've taken steps to try to help you address those. And again, we'll talk about those today, but we'll also, certainly talk about those as the year goes on. We did and continue to make updates and enhancements to the tool. I think it's important to note these are all optional, right? Like we truly try to balance the need to do anything differently with the idea of trying to continually improve the tool and respond to inquiries from both users or auditors or regulators. We want to make it as repeatable and understandable, but with a large number of credit unions as customers, we do have a different set of expectations and questions in from various credit unions. So I go all about this by saying we're sensitive to the fact that we don't want to continually change this and create any unrest with you, but at the same time, we do want to be dynamic in our ability to continue to make sure the tool is responsive and as helpful as it can be, for all of our users. And so
expectations have been changed, right? We've the modifications we've made have been, we get lots of ideas from customers, and we really appreciate all the ideas and suggestions you guys send us, guys and gals. And but we look at those with an eye of making sure if there's something we're missing that we think can be helpful to a significant portion of our users, we want to add it, but we want to add it in a way that does not alter the core functionality or the way you like to use it if you're already using it the way you like to use it. But when we hear things from auditors, they say, we expect it to do X, Y, and Z. We expect people to see it in these 4 different ways. We'll add those things as we feel that they become systemic observations from the powers that be that this needs to satisfy.
Well said, Steve, right? And I think that's the important part, right? Everything we typically add shouldn't change the way you want to do while you're using the tool today, unless you want it to change, right? And so, but then there's these additional capabilities that we've kind of, built around it to satisfy specific, points that may have been raised by an auditor or regulator, et cetera. So just a little bit of background on kind of how we think about making changes to the tool, because I know we do want to be sensitive to keeping all of you comfortable in just your process, right? That's the most important thing, is keeping your experience as positive as we can, but also you're trying to plan for things that might come to you, from a third party that we want you to be prepared for as well. All right, and so to that end, we are making a change around again, kind of driven by auditors around access control. This is something that Quick Rate users are familiar with. We hadn't done it with CECLSolver, but we have received requests from firms, particularly from their audit firms, who would like to see this. So Steve, take it away.
Yeah, so the request was from some of our users and auditors that we work with, not only to be able to capture and see what users have access to the tool at any institution, and also have a different level of access, a read-only access, so to speak, that you can share, give a login and a password to an auditor, and have them be able to navigate throughout the tool, see how it works, but not be able to change inputs and save scenarios and do anything that would mess with any existing or scenarios. So it's sort of a read-only access, mostly for auditors, possibly for examiners, and maybe if you have some board members who would like a more in-depth understanding of the tool or the calculations, but you don't want them messing with the scenarios or anything else. That's what the idea is for that. There'll be a a button you can click on. It's not there yet, but it will be next sometime in February for called user administration. You'll click on that and you'll be able to see all of the users that have logins and what level of access they have, whether it is full read-write access or simply read-only access to the tool. And it helps from a compliance standpoint. And when you get asked who has access, what type of access, et cetera, it'll be a one-stop shop to manage all that. Sean?
Great. And again, if this is not a concern at your institution or from your auditors, no problem, right? I think one of the things we didn't do this initially was the understanding, at least from my perspective, right? We're using all publicly available information, that maybe wasn't as necessary, but again, some audit firms just felt, strongly about it. So, we've acquiesced and introduced it as well.
Yeah, we started putting safeguards around saving scenarios and resaving and overriding scenarios with extra warning boxes and all that. And we thought the easier way is just to provide more robust access control in general.
Yeah. Okay. So next up is an enhanced Excel tool to address some of the validation expectations. Again, not all of you will be asked to validate CECLSolver. Some of you will. What we can do as a solution provider is what we do, right? We provide you with the SOC 1. The SOC 1 demonstrates that we took our tool, provided it to an audit firm. They confirmed that where we say it's 1 + 1 = 2, the tool in fact does that. They monitor how we make changes and adjustments to the tool, and just really validate our procedures that we use to manage the tool that we deliver to you. The second rail of validation is what's potentially responsible for the credit union. And I say potentially because, again, not everyone's asked to do this, right? You can be asked, but all of you will not be asked to do it. But if you are, then they might ask you to confirm independently what we are telling you. We cannot do this for you. So what we've done really are two things, and what your options are really are two things. One, you can hire a firm to independently validate our tool. Two, many of you may not want to do that and pay that cost. What Steve has done here is built a parallel Excel tool that you can, within your institution, somebody who's independent of the reserve function, can put data into our Excel tool and confirm the numbers that CECLSolver is generating for you. This would satisfy an independent validation of the tool. So this is just, again, if you are being asked to do this, we can certainly give you an audit firm recommendation, such as Saltmarsh, a firm that all of you are familiar with. They're familiar with the tool. They are perfectly happy and willing to provide an independent validation. Excuse me, but you may want to do it yourself. This tool allows you or someone within your institution to do that. So Steve, I'll let you take it away.
Someone within your institution that is probably not you on the call, right? Anyone who is independent to us, so we can't do it, and independent to the reserve calculation and function at the institution. So the idea here was the vast majority of the validation work with the CECLSolver tool comes with the historical analysis, right? That's where we're aggregating hundreds of thousands of data points from your historical financials and using it to go all the way from the call reports straight through to what your lifetime historical loss rates are and all the calculations in between. From that point on, once you have your lifetime historical loss rates, you're simply adding Q factors, which are subjective, and you will be justifying and defending, and then doing A + B = 1 + A + B = C for your expected future loss rate, which is your ACL. So again, the work in the validation really is within the historical data context, and so that's what this tool does. Right now, if you are interested in getting this tool and using it, you'll just reach out to your salesperson, and we will send you this spreadsheet or this Excel file that's already been downloaded with all of your historical data, and you can modify it to match any scenario that you have. If you'll notice, what we see here on the screen of that screenshot looks pretty much exactly like the historical analysis tab of the interactive tool. All you have to do is open up this Excel file if you request it, type in the WARMs that you have for any particular scenario you're working with, and change any look back periods if there's any look back periods that you want to be different from the defaults. And every calculation on here will match what you have in your historical analysis. Let me share, actually, let me just share Excel for just a second. Sean, I think that'll be helpful. Do that here. Shares. All right, when you get this file, it has a couple tabs here. It starts out with the formatted one. Again, this looks just like the historical tab. If you change a WARM, let's say, for vehicle loans to 2.25 years, you can type in any WARMs. As you do that, everything recalculates on the fly. You can change your look back periods manually if you'd like to, just like you can on the interactive tool. But the way this works is when you get the file, this is all your raw call report data. So we have a special tab specifically for every single data point that goes into our entire calculation. So there's a ton of them, right? It's quarterly data for 15 years for every segment of your loan portfolio, including charge-offs and recoveries and balances and all that good stuff. And you can add custom segmentation in here as well, if that's something that you want to add. From raw data, there's a bunch of calculation steps that get you to a net charge-off ratio or a long-term loss rate. And those are all in the intermediate tab. So everything links from the raw call report data to the intermediate calculations. Like, well, how do you get from gross charge-offs to a net charge-off ratio over a period? All those steps are right here. And they're all linked to the raw data. And then finally, that feeds into the formatted tab, which again links from the intermediate. So you can follow every calculation, every step from the raw data in the call report straight through to what your lifetime historical loss rate is for each segment of the portfolio. So this truly does a complete mathematical and calculation based validation of the historical loss calculations. So
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. Let me take back the screen here.
And if you have a if you don't feel like you need that level of detail, if you're just getting a simple question from an auditor or somebody, but how do you guys calculate the lifetime historical loss rate, for example, right? We have a separate tool, but we have a separate resource in the CECLSolver tool. If you click on our resources button, there's a file.
You want to show them, Steve?
Yeah, let me do that.
Let's go back in there and show it.
Yeah, I think we should.
Because this is, again, if you're, as Steve said, right, not everybody's going to be asked to validate. What you might get is, okay, how is CECLSolver actually calculating this number?
Yeah, we want to give them what they ask for and not a smidgen more. Because you don't want to open up a can of worms unless you have to. So if you click on the CECLSolver resources, there is historical lifetime loss rate sample calculation, just with not your data, just a sample data that shows how that historical lifetime loss rate is calculated. I already clicked on it and opened it. And it's pretty straightforward. It shows, well, here's some sample quarterly data, right? Coming straight from the call report, charge-offs, recoveries, and balance for a particular segment. Let's say you had a 3-year WARM and you wanted to calculate a lifetime loss rate with a 3-year WARM for this segment. This is how it shows you exactly how that would be calculated. We calculate net charge-off ratios for each individual quarter, for each period, and then we aggregate those up and de-annualize them, so to speak, and get a lifetime 3-year aggregate loss rate. So if it's a basic question about how the loss rate's calculated, this sample data should give a great answer. If they really demand a dig through all the data from top to bottom, then you can request that more functional historical loss rate tool in Excel from us. John.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. Grab this back. Okay. Give this a second to reload here. All right. Okay. Next up is, again, a piece of functionality that we added for flexibility. This definitely falls into the optional camp. However, the example that's probably most asked of our credit unions is, okay, you haven't had any loss history over your most recent WARM period. What if you looked at a longer period of time and wanted to evaluate a longer period of time, but still bring it back to your current WARM? Could you do that? that's what the look back, that was really kind of the genesis or the catalyst, if you will, for this customizable look back period. So Steve, again, please take it away.
Yeah, so we'll use the example that's in here that Sean mentioned. Let's say a great example, your mortgage portfolio, and you calculate a 5-year WARM for your mortgage portfolio, and you plug that in, and your historical loss rate over the entire most recent 5-year period is 0. So the burden of your entire reserve falls 100% on qualitative factor adjustments, right? Which is probably not surprising for most of you on the call, and it's not even new with CECL. We had most of our reserves coming from Q factors, with the old methodology. But if you wanted to take a longer look at history and say, I realize I've had no losses over 5-7 years. I had some losses 10 years ago, and I'd rather take a longer approach, try to get some losses into my historical context, so the entire burden of the reserve isn't falling just on subjective Q factors, right? And so you say, I want to look at a 10-year history, and I still have a WARM of 5, but I want to do a look back period of 10 years. So you change the look back period, let's say in this case to 4Q 2013, which is 10 years ago, if you're ending at the third quarter of this year. So I changed the start of a look back to 4Q13. I now have a 10-year look back period. Over that entire 10 years, I have aggregate losses of 32 basis points. However, I've only got a WARM of 5. So I've had 10-year losses totaling 32 basis points, a WARM of 5. I need to modify that 32 basis points by multiplying it by what we call the lifetime look back multiplier. If your WARM's 5 and your look back is 10, it's 5 over 10 or 0.5, right? You're taking 10 years of losses. You want to use 5 years. So you're simply dividing that 10-year rate by 2 to get a 5-year aggregate rate. That's what the multiplier is. By default, when we first built the tool, it was something we talked a lot to regulators about when we were building the tool. Was the look back periods that we see tend to be in the early design of our tool and in other tools that were out there, and methodology suggestions by the regulators, was completely arbitrary. You'd frequently and still frequently see throughout the industry people choosing a 3-year look back period across the board for the whole portfolio, or a 5-year. And while that might be fine, there's really no basis to justify randomly and arbitrarily choosing a 3 or 5-year look back. It made a lot more sense to us to match the look back period for each segment to the remaining life, right? So by default, if you plug in a 5-year WARM, it's going to use a 5-year look back period. But we wanted to add more flexibility in there, so now you're able to increase or decrease the look back period, and it'll the look back multiplier is not an input. It's the calc. It happens automatically after you choose the look back period and your WARM. John?
Thank you, Steve. And I guess we should have had the big optional red letters on this again. Like, you do not have to use this, to run CECLSolver. As Steve said in kind of in this explanation, right? This is just if you're asked, or if you are curious, or if you just want to evaluate. But this is not required to run the tool. So I just, again, want to make that very clear. This is just added horsepower, added flexibility, if you will.
And if you use it, you need to be ready to justify it, right? You need to be ready to, if your WARMs are matching your look back periods, that's pretty straightforward, pretty standard. And you're doing the same thing for every segment. If you choose one segment and kind of, I wouldn't say go out of bounds, but move your look back period or add or remove historical time periods, they're going to want to see that you're not trying to, hide the weenie, so to speak, right? Trying to change the look back period so it doesn't include the one time you had a significant loss, or vice versa. And so you're going to have to justify any decisions or subjective inputs that you put in here. But there's lots of good, reasonable reasons to modify that look back period to make it longer or shorter. If you had a merger, or if you had a big change in management, or a recap, or something else happened at your institution, say 5 years ago, and you don't think anything that's more than 5 years old is relevant, you can shorten your look back period to only be 5 years, even if your WARM is longer. So that's the other side of the coin. It's less common than Sean's suggestion or example, but that does happen as well.
Yeah, and again, I think this was really, again, the catalyst for this. The two most common use cases that were kind of the drivers of this is, again, was a credit union that has no loss history. A auditor or regulator say, hey, I want you to evaluate a longer period. Can you do that? And so the answer was yes. Through this tool, you could do that. The second one was just user curiosity. The same, kind of the same thing. Hey, we haven't had any losses with our current warms. What if I move the warm period back to a historical time period or expanded it? Could I get a different perspective on this? Again, context, helps a lot of times in this. And so, not required, optional if it helps you, ignore it if it doesn't, type of thing. All right. Next up then are the warm estimators, right? Again, when we first designed the tools I touched on, I wanted this to be initially have the most conservative bent or bias that it could, which in CECL really means a longer warm period for the warm methodology. However, we recognize that one size doesn't fit all, so we wanted to give, again, flexibility to match kind of the culture and your philosophy around the reserve. And so we provided additional levels of calculating the warm with some variations that I'll let Steve talk about.
Yeah. So the genesis of the enhanced warm estimator, as Sean said, when we designed the tool, we wanted to start from a very conservative place until we had a high level of comfort that more assumptions and more aggressive calculations were going to be either industry standard or at least acceptable. And we got that bad choice of words, that validation from the NCUA. It was about a year ago or so when they came out with some of their guidance. We asked them for more guidance, and I'm sure it wasn't just because of us, but they ended up providing more guidance on warm calculations. They did that by hiring a third-party statistical firm to go out and get loan level data from hundreds of small to medium-sized credit unions all across the country and do their own warm calculations, industry peer-based warm and prepayment calculations, and then present that and share that with credit unions on an ongoing basis. And so we utilize that data and we update it every quarter and to give us and that when they gave us that additional calculation, they shared how they were calculating the warms, and they decided that they were comfortable with making amortization adjustments to the warm calculations and not just prepayment adjustments, leading to shorter warms or more aggressive or less conservative calculations. And once that happened, we obviously were, since they provided that, we were comfortable doing the same thing with our tool as well. So in lockstep, we provided additional methodologies or options for warm calculations, which result in shorter warms and, all things being equal, smaller reserves. And so I have shown the different methodologies here. The first methodology is just a straight warm calculation, making an adjustment for prepayments with the prepayment input assumptions or defaults coming directly from NCUA data, which is great now. It's a good resource for that. And then options B and C take into account amortization and not, so it's a more calculated or more complicated calculation. Sean, if you'll go to the next slide. Most of you are probably familiar with this, whether you're doing the warm calculations yourself or whether you're having us do it. This is how we present it to you and give you the options of how you want to, what your ultimate warm calculations to be. First method A, again, all we're doing is taking current balance data and stated contractual maturity date and doing a basic warm calculation on that, and then adjusting it for prepayments. The prepayment defaults coming from the NCUA directly. And that, let's say that leads to a 4.22 year warm. Second method, method B there, we take that warm and we use that to calculate a straight line amortization schedule and then overlay the prepayments on top of it. And so it's a different methodology to then take into account amortization and get an amortization adjusted portfolio level warm calculation. This is, as you can see, always going to be a lower warm and likely either the same or a shorter or a smaller ACL. And this is as far as almost all of you on the call would ever really need to go. We really think there's three basic options. method A, method B, and then method D. Method D is just using the NCUA data, the NCUA peer-based WARM guidance as your WARM calculations instead of using your own data. Method C is just a loan level, much more granular, probably way overkill alternative for those institutions that are maybe a little bigger or have a one particular segment that's more complex and has abnormal or different sort of balloon payments throughout the portfolio or amortization assumptions, or if it's one segment that your auditor is really concerned about and wants to see more detail just for that one segment at the loan level, you could switch to a different method just for that segment and then use the more straightforward methodologies for your other segments. This is where you plug in or where you have loan level data, a loan level amortization schedule, and you plug in assumptions about balloons and amortizations for each individual loan in the portfolio. Again, not something that you're going to want a really good reason to be using method C. Otherwise, it's just not a very, you're getting, as Sean would say, no juice for the squeeze. Sean.
Great, and I think just to thanks, Steve. I think just to reiterate, option C is again 99.999% of you are not going to do it. C is an option if you're looking for it. It's not finding you, right? Like if you want to do that loan level, no one's asking you to do that loan level, right? So really A and B, really are the options that all of you should be utilizing.
And then using this as your sanity check, so to speak.
Right.
If you're using either of those methodologies, you're going to need to plug in some sort of assumption on prepayment rates. And prepayment rates are notoriously subjective and difficult to find good industry data on. There was no industry data at all that was particularly helpful, honestly, or almost none, until the NCUA came out with this. But this has been particularly helpful because it is real credit union data from across the country. So now we have prepayment assumptions that are pretty good ones to use from the NCUA. We update this every quarter as we get the updated data from the NCUA. And then when you're finished calculating your WARMs, you go and look at these WARM calculations by segment that the NCUA provides as a sanity check to make sure you're not that much higher or lower than your peers. And if you are, there's nothing wrong with that, but you'll want to understand why that you diverge, if you diverge significantly from the peers in a WARM for a segment of your portfolio. It's all about making reasonable assumptions and then having a defense or justification for them. And the more data like this that we get, the easier that becomes for you guys.
Exactly. And right, context matters, right? And so this it gives you some context. Secondly, the standard calls for a reasonable and supportable like prepayment assumption. Again, this utilizing the data from the NCUA certainly clears that hurdle, right? It certainly clears that hurdle. And that's why it's perfectly appropriate for all of you. And that's why we use it in the CECLSolver. Yep. So again, there's some additional tools that we won't spend a whole lot of time on. We'll just reference them. They're in the slide deck here that you can reach out to David and Jason if you have any questions or would like to take a look-see at any of these. This will be an area that we try to really work hard in 2024 to build out some of the information, additional financial information around the credit unions in the country. That's high on our priority list. Excuse me. One of those is, again, in fact, the Excel add-in tool that we've touched on here. Steve, I don't know if there's anything you want to add today about this.
No, I mean, the Excel add-in tool is our first foray into just giving you full access to the entire financial industry as far from a data perspective, right? You can search for any credit unions or banks that you want in the country. You can pull any historical financial data or trends or ratios that exists anywhere in our database directly into an Excel environment, whether you're doing some peer analysis, whether you're trying to see what commercial banks in your area you're maybe competing with. So you can cross the line from credit union data to commercial bank data if you'd like. It's a fully featured, but it's pretty open-ended. You can pull in a little bit of data for a lot of institutions, or a lot of data on one particular institution. If you want to pull up, your balance sheet over the last 8 years, you can pull up your full balance sheet over the last 24 quarters or 8 years or whatever directly into an Excel environment. And so it takes a little bit of getting used to. We're happy to walk you through it if it's something that you're interested in test driving. And This particular one is, as robust as it is a different, separate subscription fee, but it's something we can walk you through if you really have an interest in doing next level financial analysis on the industry.
Great, thanks, Steve. Just another slide on the add-in tool. So this is again an area of development for 24 and beyond. Steve has put together and done a great job. So as you're running using the tool, we felt like, hey, if there was insights and data we could share with you, again, to give context, provide some sanity checks, information around what's going on with CECL and the ACL, we thought that'd be helpful. So Steve has tackled this project, and again, we've shared some of this in previous coffee talks, but we'll continue to do that.
This is an example of using where I just use the Excel add-in tool, and I pulled up all of the all of the credit unions in NCUA peer group 5. So there's a ton of them, right? There's like 1,000 of them, and looked at reserve trends over the last 7 or 8 quarters, looking at median and average values, and also 25th and 75th to kind of give some upper and lower boundaries between within which most credit unions lie from that perspective. It can be looked at a national level, at a state level, at any level you want. Next slide. Trying to think what I've shared. We shared this before, but it's a great tool. Or I mean, it's great data just to remind you of where everyone else is at when it comes to unfunded commitments and held maturity securities. This will be updated in the next coffee talk. We'll have all the 12/31 data. Not everyone's filed. Most people are trying to finish filing their call reports right now. It's a nice way to say it. So
big weekend for that. Big weekend for that.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, there hundreds are coming in every day at this point. But right now, the majority of them are not available on the NCUA site yet. They will be next week. But as of right now, it's still, the last good data set is still 9/30. While 78% of credit unions around the entire country have some level of unfunded commitments. Balances, unfunded commitment balances. Only 8% of the credit unions in the country reported any level of ACL on them, meaning that 90% of credit unions that do have unfunded commitments still reported no ACL for those unfunded commitments. Now, our tool, as you know, provides a module to help you calculate or estimate what ACL you might want to report on those unfunded commitments. The majority of credit unions are still just putting a big fat 0 there. And we're watching this very closely to see how it inches up. And it's been inching up every quarter. And we expect that to continue for the foreseeable future. Held to maturity securities, bit of a different animal, right? A third of credit unions in the country have some amount of held to maturity securities, but almost all of them are government guaranteed type securities that don't really have any actual credit risk. So less than 1% of you guys have reported any sort of reserve on that held to maturity securities portfolio. So virtually all credit unions that have held to maturity securities are still putting a 0 there. And that's okay. That's completely appropriate. That's factually accurate, I guess, is a better way to say it.
It's what you'd expect. What you'd expect.
Yeah, we thought that kind of data would be helpful. We are in the process of and we're almost finished, of mining our own user scenarios to give you another level of insight into what institutions are doing for their ACL calculations and their WARMs at the segment level. WARM data, as we've talked about, is something that there's the only industry data is what now comes out from the NCUA, but we have hundreds and hundreds of credit unions using our tool and creating scenarios monthly and quarterly. And so we have a ton of proprietary data now, so we can start sharing with you guys, of all of our users, what are happening to WARMs on mortgage loans. Our used vehicle Q factor rates been increasing over the last year or so. That's the kind of question that you could never really answer historically because there was no data that existed publicly about it. So we're trying to start being able to answer those questions now that we have so many of you on board. So if you go to the next couple slides, this analysis was done on our commercial bank, our community bank customers, not our credit union customers. So this data is not relevant yet, but this is exactly what it will look like for credit unions next month when we do our coffee talk. We'll have the same data on our entire universe of credit union users. But I wanted to give you a preview so you could see exactly what we're going to be able to share with you. Trends in not only ACLs to loans and unfunded commitment ACLs. On this slide, the next slide is the really good one. This is what we'll be able to show you guys for credit unions. As you'll notice, this loan segmentation seems a little odd. This is a commercial bank loan segmentation. This is how they have to break out their loans on their call reports. Slightly different from you guys. But we had over 75,000 segment level user scenarios run over the last year, which is a ton of data. So we can start sharing, hey, 1 to 4 family residential loans around the country, the WARMs on those are increasing a little bit. Maybe prepayments are decreasing. Well, they are. Q factors, all things being equal, have been, on the decline for consumer loans over the last year. Why is that? And how can I use that to help me defend or justify my qualitative factor adjustments? So again, this data is real data. It's not for credit unions right now. It's for commercial banks, but it is somewhat relevant. It'll be super relevant next month when this is all credit union data.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Yeah. So again, I think that's, I think a big part of what, as Steve alluded to or pointed out, right, we're going to try to bring you better, more context, right? So again, just again, you can use it to maybe perhaps influence any of your Q factors. But the fact that it'll be real data, we think will be valuable. So, wherever we can find opportunities to bring you that, that's really one of our goals internally here for 2024. So at this point, if you have any questions, go ahead and submit those. Just a reminder, we did do a webinar on the Excel add-in tool. So certainly watch that if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that. Next month for our coffee talk, we'll welcome back Paul Allen, our dear friend from Saltmarsh. We'll talk to Paul about a lot of these same topics, right? What they saw within their user group or their customers and clients in 23. What he expects for 24. We'll talk about what they're seeing and doing in audits, of their credit unions. And then he's obviously just a tremendous resource for all of us to ask questions on. So we'll welcome him and look forward to that conversation. We want to thank you again for joining us for today, for making these coffee talks so helpful and meaningful and gratifying. I don't see any other questions. Steve, anything you want to leave our group with here today before we let them have their weekend?
No, just that I'm looking forward to the end of college football season and college basketball season starting, since I feel like Wake Forest might actually have a basketball team. We certainly didn't have a football team this year.
I like it. All right. Well, again, thank you all for joining us today. Mark your calendars for next month to hear from Paul, and then we will look forward to seeing you, and have a great weekend. And thanks again for joining us today. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.